Hey, how's it going? Hope you're doing well, and I'm glad you can make it back to the channel. Today, we're talking about component properties in Figma. Now, this is a super powerful feature Figma offers, as it's going to allow us to create more flexible and reusable components in our design systems. Something about component properties is that we can get them confused with variant properties sometimes and not know when to use which one. So I'll be clearing up all that confusion in this video, and I hope you enjoy and learn something. Alright, so let's talk about component properties. What are they? What do they do? What's their purpose? So a component property's main purpose is to allow us to create a component that we give properties to give us more control over that component, to make it flexible and more reusable throughout our design. So component properties are made up of 4 pillars or properties. These 4 pillars are the Boolean property, the instant swap property, the text property, and finally the variant property. Now you might be thinking, the variant property? I thought that was different from the component property. No, the component property, the variant property is a part of the component properties. So don't think of them as being separate. It is a part of it, although it is different. So how is it different? How is the variant property different? Alright, so the first 3 properties, the Boolean, the instant swap, and the text property, those apply directly to the main component. So when we create that main component and we add those properties to it, it's directly to that main component. Now, the difference is the variant property, it only applies to the variant. So when we create a main component and we create an instance of that component or a variant of that component, the variant property is only applied to the variant, not the main component. So that's how it's different. The first 3 apply directly to the main component. The variant property only applies to the variant. So that's where some of the confusion comes, because the variant property is very different from the other ones. So it'll make a little bit more sense when we go ahead and cover them. So I'm going to go ahead and cover the properties. Alright, so let's talk about the first pillar of the component properties, which is the Boolean property. Now, what is the Boolean property? The Boolean property, all it is, simply, is that it lets us show or hide a layer within our component. Now, it's like whether something is on or off, it just gives us 2 options. Do you want a foot massage? Do you not want a foot massage? Simple. So, what are the steps of applying the Boolean property? Now, what you're going to want to do is create a main component and apply auto layout to it. So that's what we've done here. Then you're going to think about, what layer do I want to apply this property to? What do I want to show or hide? In my case, I want to show this icon here. So what you're going to do is click the icon. You're going to go to the right where you see layer, and you're going to click this button here, which is create Boolean property. Now, you're going to name this just something logical: show icon, show download icon, has icon, something logical. And then as for value, it's just what behavior do you want by default? Do you want to show it or hide it? So we want to show it by default, so we're going to leave it true. We're going to create this property. Now, once we create the property, it's applied. We've done the Boolean property. So whenever we create an instance from our main component and click on that, we're given the option over here at the right to either turn it on or off. So that is our Boolean property. It's super powerful because it's practically giving us more behavior of our component and making it more flexible. And it's like we have 2 completely different components within one. So the Boolean property gets applied to the main component, and yeah, it gives us this functionality. So put simply, Boolean property, all it is it lets us show or hide a layer within our component. Alright, so moving on to the second pillar, it's going to be the instant swap property. Now, the instant swap property, all it is it lets us know what part of our component can we swap out for another. In order to do this, you're going to first create your component, which I created here, and next you're going to choose what you want to apply this property to. In my case, I want to apply it to this icon because I want to swap it out for a selection of icons, so I can just change it on command. Now, you want to make sure you're not using an image. You want it to be a component with probably a vector. A vector would probably be preferred so you can change the color of the icon. So that's what we're going to do. So make sure to not use an image here. We were able to use an image for the Boolean property because we were just turning on or off a layer pretty much. For this, it's a little bit different. So I'm going to delete this image and I'm going to grab us a component that has a vector. So in order to do that, you can go to resources. I went to false for icons and you can run this, but I'm sure there's others. And you're just going to grab some icons. It doesn't really matter which ones you grab. Just get whatever you need. So I have these right here. Go ahead and drag them over. And then what you want to do is select these, hit this drop down menu, and create multiple components. Now we want to add one of these icons to our main component. Now in order to do that, you don't want to just drag the icon over there. You want to hold Alt to create an instance of the icon and then drag it in so it becomes a part of the main component. Now once we do this, we want to click on our main component. We want to go to the, you want to click on your icon, whatever you want to apply the property to. So you click on your icon, you want to go to this right side menu over here, and you want to click this, select instance. Now once we do that, we're given this drop down menu in which we can create an instance swap property. So once we click that, we can just name this icon swap if you want to. And then the value is just, of course, what you want by the default value. So all these icons we dragged in are now in this local components, and we can choose any. For this, we're just going to do the alien at first, and we create our property. Now look at this. Whenever we create an instance of our button, and then we click on it, we're given the option over here at the right to change this icon to whatever we want. So if I want it to be an anchor, look, it changed to an anchor. So it's super useful, and it allows you to change your icons on command and just swap them out for another. So that's super powerful, as it's given us more behavior and control over our components. I forgot to mention, if you ever want to swap out the default behavior of your main icon, all you got to do is select your main component. You go to the right over here where you see the property you created. You're going to hit this little icon to edit the properties, and now you can change it to whatever you like. So if you want it to by default be an anchor, then you have an anchor. And then of course if you want to change the instance, you just click on the instance component, you go over here, and then if you want to see the others, go to local components, and then you can click the ones that you want and it automatically changes it. Alright, so let's talk about the third pillar, the text property. Now this text property is applied to the main component, but all it does is it lets us know that, hey, if we create an instance of this main component, we're allowed to change the text in that instance. Because by default, if I create an instance of this component without applying that property, and I say, hey, I want to change this text in here, if I look, I could change the text like this, but you do not want to do that. That breaks the rules. Instead, you want to click on the component, look at the right, and look at your properties. So these are my properties right here. If I don't see anything telling me I can change that text, then leave it alone. You're not supposed to change that text in the instance. This is good for consistency, so if you're sharing components among team members and they don't know whether or not they can change their text, by having that property, it tells them, hey, you can change this text. So if you don't see the property, don't change the text. Now, if we want to add the property, we got to follow these steps. So start off, you want to create a component with at least one text layer. Now, I've created my component and I have this text layer right here. What I'm going to do is click on the text, and what I want to do is apply the property to it. So if we go to these little text options right here, at the right side, there's create text property. We're going to click on it, and we can name it whatever we want. Text is fine, and then value is whatever default value you want. Button's fine. So we're going to create the property. Now the property is applied. So whenever we create an instance of this component and we look at its properties, we see that we're given this new text property and it says button, and I can change that to whatever I like. So you see, I'm allowed to change it now, and that's how you do that. Now you may be thinking, there's all this space in between. How do we fix that? And there's a simple way to do that. So you're going to go to your main component, and you're going to go to the text options, and you want to make sure auto width is applied. So we're going to click that, and now our button's going to resize to whatever text we put in there. So I could do hi, and now it resizes. So that's how you apply the text property to your components. Yeah, all it does is it allows you to create an instance of a main component and say, hey, we're allowed to change this text. Alright, so I've talked about the three main properties that make up the component properties. That is the Boolean, instant swap, and the text property. Now, all three of these properties are very similar in that they apply directly to the main component. Now, the one caveat is the variant property. The variant property is so different from the other properties, and I'm not going to explain fully everything to do with variants because this video would be extremely long. So I've already created a video about variants, so I'd recommend going and watching that and then coming back to this video, or either you can finish this video and then watch that later. Either way, I think variants and watching that video is going to help you understand them better and give a clearer picture of this. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about variants very briefly and show you kind of how they're different and how these other three component properties, when we would want to use them over a variant. Because if you create variants for everything, you're going to lose so much time, and when you could have just made it so much more simple. So let's talk about that. Alright, so I'm going to do my best to be as straightforward with what I've done here as I can, and do note that there's multiple ways to do one thing, and feel free to do it however you like. This is just the way I like to do it. So we have this main component that we're familiar with right here, and I've just created these other components that are variations of this main component. So you can see they look a little bit different and they're styled a little bit different. And all I did to do that is create an instance of my main, restyled it how I'd like, and created it into a component. And I just repeated that. Now, these variations are just how it's going to look when the button's hovered, when it's clicked, with an icon, or without an icon. So the thing is the way we name these components is super important. So if we look at this main component here, the way you're going to name each of these is you're going to start off thinking about, hey, what component did I create? Well, I created a button component, so that's what I'm going to start off with naming. Next, anytime you see a /, that's going to let you know that you're creating a new property. So / new property, so property 1 gets the value default. Another /, so property 2 gets the value icon. And you can see that pattern through here. For example, down here on this one, we see that property 1 has the value hover, property 2 has the value no icon. And that's kind of consistent with what button we created. We created a button with no icon, and that's how it looks when it's hovered. So pick up on that pattern with how we named it, because it's super important, and I'll show you why. Alright, so once we've renamed all these, all we have to do to turn this into a variant is select each of our individual components, go to this right panel, and hit Combine as Variants. Now, each of these individual components are inside of one container. So if we go to this main component right here, we have different properties set, and that has to do with the way we named it. So property 1 has 3 different values, property 2 has 2 different values. And we don't want to just leave these set to property 1 or property 2. We want to name it something a little bit more coherent. So property 1 has to do with states, so we will name it state. So what state do we want? And we have 3 different values. Now property 2, we could name it icon. Now you may be thinking icon, that's a little bit weird. And yeah, it should look weird, and you'll probably see why. So since we've created our variant, what we can do is drag in from our assets tab our variant. And the power of this is if we look to the right here, we have state and icon, and we say, hey, I want the state to be clicked, and I want the icon to have no icon. Look at that. We're utilizing variants. The problem is we're not being efficient. So in this case, I want you to think, what could we have replaced this with to utilize those other properties over variants? Now, with this logo here, we were given 2 options. So what does that sound like? the Boolean property, as we could either show this logo or hide it. In this case, we used variants to show or hide it, and we had to create 3 different buttons without a logo in order to use variants here. Whereas if we used the Boolean property, we would have just had to create the Boolean property, and then these buttons would already be created for us. We wouldn't have had to. Now imagine you had hundreds of different variations, and you had to create variations with different icons. That would take forever, and it would be super inefficient and just a big no-no. We could have used the instant swap property there to choose different logos instead of creating buttons for each one. And same thing here. We can use the Boolean property instead of creating each button with and without the icon. So I'll go ahead and show you how to create the Boolean property again, and hopefully it will clear everything up. Alright, so I've went ahead and backstepped a little bit. Got rid of the variant and just turned these back into individual components and deleted all the components that didn't have an icon, as we won't need them anymore. I also renamed these individual components without icon in their naming, because we're not dealing with a icon property anymore. The Boolean property will handle that for us. So what I would recommend doing is turning these logos into components, as that's going to be best practice, because having them as their own individual frame, nothing's connected with them, and will just be a little bit more consistent if we go ahead and turn those into components. Alright, so to turn these into components, all we got to do is just get rid of our frame, drag it out of here, and we can go ahead and delete these frames over here, as we no longer need them. And we can turn this frame into a component. So to turn that into a component, all I got to do is click the frame and turn it into a component. Now I can drag the instances into each one. And it would have probably been best to do this beforehand, but I just forgot to and wasn't really paying attention whether I was using frames or a component instance. But by using a component instance, it's going to help us be more consistent and have more control of each of these in our components. So when I click on our main component for the logo, I can change, well, make sure to grab the vector, but I can change all of the colors of the icons at once. And if I resize it, they're all going to resize. Whereas before, if we were using just frames, we would have had to go into each individual frame, grab the vector, change the color, go into the frame, grab the vector, change the color. And we had to do that for each one. We couldn't have done it all at once. So by using component instances, it's just going to give us more control over our components, and it's just a better practice to get into. Alright, so all we need to do now is select all these individual components and combine them as variants. So now they're all variants, and we can apply the Boolean property. So what I'm going to do is just expand this, and I'm going to grab each component instance. Make sure you grab the component instance. We're going to go over here to layer, and all we need to do is apply that Boolean property. So show anchor, and we can leave the value at true. So we applied the Boolean property to this variant. Now we have to apply this for each individual variant, as their properties are separate or individual of one another. So I'm going to grab this component instance right here, and then I'm going to apply it. So show anchor, and it's a little bit quicker since we've already created the property. Grab this property, or grab this component instance, go over to the right, and then apply Boolean property, show anchor. So now I've applied the Boolean property to all my logos. So when I go to assets and I drag in this variant, now I can just say, hey, I want a click button without an anchor. Well, maybe I want a hovered button. Well, I have it. Maybe I want a default button. Now I have it. So it's super powerful. We've created all 3 of these buttons without even using variants. So in summary, we turned these logos into Boolean properties, and by doing that, we were able to cut down on how many variations we had to create and completely get rid of the variations without a logo. So whenever you're designing, you want to think about the 4 pillars of component properties. So the Boolean, the instant swap, the text property, and finally the variant property. And you want to prioritize the first 3 first and the variant property last. So whenever you're making a variant, think to yourself, could have this been replaced with the other component properties? And if it could have been, then use those over creating a variant. And that's just going to make you much more efficient and cut down on how many variations you have to create, and you're going to become a better designer. Alright, so I think we covered everything. We went over how component properties can give us more control over our components. We also talked about the 4 pillars of component properties, so the instant swap, the boolean, the text, and the variant property. And we went over why we need to prioritize the variant property last. And by doing that, it's going to make us much more efficient and cut down on how many variations we have to create. So yeah, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you and I'll do my best to answer them. And feel free to like and subscribe. Thanks.